Welcome to Fiscal Focus at DawnNews English. My name is Danish Khan. I'm Assistant Professor of Economics at Franklin and Marshall College. And today I'm joined by a special guest, Professor Naomi Hossain. Naomi is Professor of Development Studies at SOAS University in UK, and she has done extensive research on politics of development, state accountability, and protest and civil society movements in the context of Bangladesh and other developing countries. Thank you, Naomi, for your time. I want to start with the current political situation in Bangladesh. In the aftermath of the resignation of former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, and how do you understand the political uprising in Bangladesh, and especially at such a large scale with the large involvement of students? And what are some key underlying factors behind it, in your opinion? And would you call it a coup, revolution, or something else?
Well, that's an excellent question. I don't think it was a coup. I think it's closer to a revolution by more usual reckonings, but perhaps an uprising is the appropriate term. I mean, how to understand it? And also, it's not even very clear that she has resigned. It seems that maybe she has been required to leave, been pushed out, in fact, by the president. It's not quite clear that she has voluntarily resigned. We keep hearing conflicting stories. But nevertheless, she's gone for now. She's not the head of the government anymore. I think that one thing to realize is that, of course, no regime lasts forever, right? And this was a very, very powerful regime. In fact, I would say it remains quite a powerful force in Bangladeshi politics. It's very clear that Awami League supporters have not gone away. It's very clear that the Awami League government, after 15 years, had very successfully fused the party to the state institutions and also to some business and civil society institutions, including the media, some of the media. So, the extent to which they've gone away, I think, remains to be seen. They seem to still be, active and prominent in the aftermath.
It's a successful case of export-oriented growth, especially in the context of South Asia and other countries of the global South. But it seems like what you are suggesting, despite so much growth in exports of garment industry, the lives of working people were not substantially improved, and that's led to a lot of resentment. So how do you see in coming days the prospects of deepening democracy in Bangladesh? Are you optimistic about it, or you're still unsure or pessimistic?
I mean, it's so hard to say. I think we have to be a bit optimistic this week, at least. I mean, it's been 1 week since the Awami League regime fell, and only a matter of days since Professor Yunus at the Grameen Bank took over as the head of the interim government. So I'm trying to be optimistic. However, I should say that we have actually seen a situation like this before in recent history, which was in the period 2007-2008. And that came after a period when the BNP, the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, which is the main opposition to the Awami League, they had been in power for 5 years, 4 or 5 years, I can't remember now, 5 years, I think. And it had been increasingly authoritarian, and there was a lot of political violence, there was a lot of corruption. I don't know how you can compare that regime with the Awami League regime that just went, because they had much less time to plunder and to beat people up. But nevertheless, it was considered to be a very bad situation, and an army-backed caretaker government took over at that time and stayed there for 2 years, tried to clean up Bangladeshi politics and political institutions and other institutions of accountability. And after that 2 years, we had a beautiful, perfect, free and fair election, absolutely, probably the fairest election you've ever seen anywhere in Asia. And that brought the Awami League to power in a landslide, after which we had 15 years of increasingly authoritarian rule. So, it's hard, it's hard. We've seen in South Asia, India is remarkable, absolutely remarkable in its ability to maintain, I don't know if I would call it, a liberal democracy, but at least multi-party elections. which are not thoroughly rigged. It's remarkable, but many countries, as we know, in South Asia haven't succeeded in that, and Bangladesh really struggles with that. I think, though, and this is maybe not a very fashionable thing to say, but I think, knowing quite a few people who work at the grassroots, local level, subnational level, local government and so on, traveling quite a bit as I do, or at least I used to until quite recently, around the country, that there are quite a lot of signs of democratization at the local level. And by that, I don't mean people going out and voting. I mean another kind of democratization, which is people being much more aware of their rights, people being much more capable of engaging with their government at the local level, people being better capable of organizing themselves to claim those rights, to engage with government, to engage with each other. So there is a kind of democratization that has gone on in Bangladesh. And that, I think, has a lot to do with what was for many years a strong investment in civil society and NGOs of various kinds in Bangladesh, but also, very much local grassroots, non-aid supported activities. So there's a lot of that. So I feel quite optimistic about that. If that can be amplified and supported, I think there are reasons to believe that, your average Bangladeshi citizen in the rural areas and the small towns believe in their rights, believe that they have a right to have a say in government, believe also in things like human rights, which I think is quite a modern and quite a progressive sort of development. But this is what I see. This is what I have been witnessing in Bangladesh. If the national level can sort itself out, then I think that the local level will be able to spread that democratization further.
Yeah.
One more.
Yeah.
And this has to do with the workers, and you mentioned the garments industry, and it's not just the garments industry, there are other industries as well where workers' rights really do need to be protected, and in particular where I believe that strong, authentic, genuinely representative labour unions, trade unions could really contribute to the democratization process. I keep saying this, all round, if you look at the Western world where you've had where you've got strong social democracies especially, you have those partly because you have got quite effective trade unions. And without that kind of mass membership organisation, I think democracy is always going to be a bit fragile and a bit weak.
Now, on this point, this is an excellent point. I totally agree. The bargaining power of working people is directly tied to their socioeconomic outcomes, and unions and trade unions allow them to improve their bargaining power vis-a-vis employers. So in the case of Bangladesh, because it's kind of a global factory for garments industry, and there are a lot of multinationals who have direct economic interest in Bangladesh, how they have been dealing with this apolitical change and the prospects of this workers' improvement of bargaining power, which they may see as a cut in their profits.
I think that the whole point of global value chains, and maybe the garments industry is one of the worst in this, the global apparel chain is perhaps one of the worst, and there's no commitment to the country. There's no commitment to the factories that supply and manufacture the garments that you're selling. This is exactly the whole point of the global value chain. Is if you're finding it troublesome to source in Bangladesh, you'll go to Ethiopia, or you'll go to Vietnam or India, or wherever it is. So I don't know. I think that in the short term there'll have been disruption, but we saw during the COVID pandemic, when the world closed down for COVID, the international brands simply just took off and refused to pay for garments that they had been contracted to buy that were being manufactured for them. They just took off. And it was a terrible thing that they did, because these workers were out of work, but also the factories were not being paid for work that they had already done. So I really don't think they care at all. They'll move on to the next place. In the short term, they might feel a little bit of pain, but they'll move on if they feel like it. But I think that Bangladesh does depend overly on the garments industry. I think that's very well known, and efforts to diversify the economy are very, very crucial for Bangladesh at this stage. and to move up the value chain. There's no moving up the value chain if you don't invest in workers, if you don't invest in public education, if you don't invest in health and social protection and housing and all the things that make workers productive. So none of those things really were very effectively dealt with. You know, I'm on record as being something of an admirer of the development progress that came out of Awami League regime. But nonetheless, we're all aware, and I was very much aware, of the underinvestment, certainly in human development. They needed to do a lot more. But, you know, when you don't stand the risk of losing an election, why would you bother investing in the people? You would rather invest in your cronies who want to take enormous loans from the banks and not return them.
Makes sense. And on the issue of the secularism, there has been a lot of concern shown by some segments of the society and international commentators now that after the departure of Sheikh Hasina, the secularism or secular credential of Bangladeshi state and society are under threat. How legitimate are these concerns in your opinion?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that you're absolutely right that the Awami League was always seen as a bulwark against, you know, Islamism and extremism of various kinds. And certainly, you know, there were several moments during that 15-year period when the Awami League did crack down very heavily on Islamists. I haven't seen any evidence yet that there's going to be any massive, you know, rise in Islamic extremism. But, you know, if we are going to move to free and fair elections, certainly parties like the Jamaat are likely to get some seats. You know, they historically had a, you know, less than double-digit share of the vote, even at their peak. But nonetheless, they were, I should say, a very well-organized party. I think the evidence is that they have been weakened over the last 15 years. Many of their leaders, of course, were charged and convicted of war crimes during war crimes in 1971. They were convicted in the teens, you know, in the 2012-2013 period. So I think that's very likely that they'll get some seats. But also, they were always a very moderate Islamist party. I think the fears of extremism don't come from that side. There are other platforms that have been quite robust in the past, but I haven't seen any evidence yet. I mean, I think it's something to watch. But the Bangladeshi people don't display a great deal of appetite for extreme forms of religion and politics. They don't seem to like it. They're very, on the whole, quite pious people, but they don't see that necessarily needs to be in their politics.
Yeah, and then especially now with the role of Gen Z, and in some ways this is a political uprising led by young people and especially students. So can you talk about the role of students in Bangladeshi politics and how it becomes so it continues to remain so central, as some of them have got now a share in the government, the new interim government, and their approach towards secularism and religion?
You know, some of the most striking images from the protests were these groups of young women going out and fighting with the security forces. There was one or two really memorable images of one woman in a niqab and one woman in a pair of jeans going out together, looking after each other. I mean, this is really these are the defining images of Bangladesh as far as I'm concerned now. You know, both the sense that women are, you know, relatively empowered compared to many other places in the world to get involved in street politics or any other kind of politics. But also that the secular and the religious were coming out together to fight for their rights, to fight for the safety of their friends, their classmates. Student politics, I mean, you know, it has a very, very long history. You know, many people, before it really came to a head and the Awami League government was toppled, many people were recalling the 1952 language struggle, the language movement, which was when, I don't know how many people of the younger generation will know this, but the when Bangladesh was East Pakistan, the plan was to introduce Urdu as the national language, and that meant that you had to speak and write in Urdu in order to pass the civil service exam. So if you wanted to join the very elite civil service of Pakistan, you would have Bengali would not have been any use to you. You would have been disadvantaged. There was a big movement, and the Bengalis of East Pakistan campaigned successfully for this to not be passed. And this was most people say this was the first shot of the liberation movement that eventually got Bangladesh's independence from Pakistan. So students were very active then. They were very active in 1971. They were very active in 1990 when President Ershad, who had been a military leader, was ousted. They were probably just as active in 1996 when another movement unseated Begum Khaleda Zia, and here they are again in 2024. So it's, they're always a force. They're organized, they're clever, they're capable of coming out. They're not from such poor backgrounds. They have to worry about eating and working every day, so they have that kind of slight cushion. It's a global phenomenon anyway. It's not just a Bangladeshi thing, is it? I keep saying to people we should be looking at what happened in Chile, especially now that we have student leaders in positions of politics. And we remember 1968 in Europe. So this is not unique to Bangladesh by any means. I worry a little bit, though. It's a lot of pressure on very young people that they're the ones that have to be the savior of the country's democracy every time. When they should really be, having fun and going to classes and so on. It's a lot. But, the thing is that it's very clear now that whatever happens in this period, this interim government or the next government, that there's going to be some time before any government is very comfortable about veering off into authoritarianism again, knowing that there is this force which appeared to come out of nowhere. I study protests. Not just in Bangladesh, and around the world, and it's very rare to see a protest that came out of essentially, it was quite spontaneous in many ways, this movement, but which did not have an opposition group organizing behind it. It does not seem to have been the case that anyone apart from the student, they called it the anti-discrimination movement, and just general supporters in the public were behind it. No political parties that we could find, any evidence of them giving anything except maybe a bit of moral support on the side. Any other active groups, just those, quite spontaneous, quite authentic. So it's quite remarkable from that point of view.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, it has been inspiring for many other young people, especially in the global south. All right, thank you so much for your time. It was wonderful talking with you. And I'll hope to get in touch with you again, and have a great day.
Entirely my pleasure. Best of luck with this wonderful initiative. I'm a great admirer of Dawn always, and I'm looking forward to hearing these podcasts.